Hello, I'm Jim Shelton, political analyst with 31st Street Swing Left. And on behalf of my co-facilitator, Julie Greenberg, I'd like to welcome all of you to this seminar on the fight against MAGA media. We're going to have very minimal preliminaries because we want to get to our key speakers, Dan and Tara. But I would like to share one slide just to thank all the great people that have helped put this together. First and foremost, I would say our 26 wonderful co-sponsors, but also our technical team on the left-hand side who made all this possible. Now we're going to go directly now to Dan Pfeiffer, who's well known to, I think, just about everybody as the co-host of Pod Save America, but also the author of the seminal book, Battling the Big Lie. So over to you, Dan.
I will very quickly talk about the challenge that we are facing in disinformation, which is why we are all here and why Tara and Courier are doing such important work. This is, and there's one way of looking at the last week or so where Fox News, the most prominent avatar for right-wing propaganda and disinformation, is forced to pay Dominion Voting Systems nearly $750 million in settlements. They have more lawsuits coming that could be even more expensive than this one. And then earlier this week, they fired Tucker Carlson, their most popular and probably most dangerous propagandist. And there's a way to look at that and say, we are winning. We have turned the corner. The right-wing propaganda machine is falling down. I wish that were the case, but that is not the case. Fox News is ultimately just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to right-wing propaganda and disinformation. To give you some perspective of this, more than 160 million Americans voted in the last election. Tucker Carlson, the most popular star on Fox News, was getting 3 million viewers a night, a tiny fraction of the overall electorate. Yet we know from our daily lives, from everyone who I know on this call has been talking to voters at the doors, on the phones, people in our lives, people in our networks and our families, that anti-democratic, and I use that in both the capital and lowercase sense of the word democratic, narratives are proliferating throughout our politics, throughout society. And it is happening because the right wing has spent billions of dollars in decades investing in a right-wing propaganda disinformation machine that is embodied by Fox News, but powered by Facebook. It includes all of these digital sites, some of them you're familiar with, like the Daily Wire and Breitbart, and others which are incredibly powerful that you probably have never heard of and have fortunately lived in ignorant bliss of their presence, like the Gateway Pundit, like entire networks on Telegram and 8chan and 4chan. They're just pushing out this information that is getting shared. And the Republicans and the right have invested in this for the reason that they understand a fundamental truth of American politics that too few Democrats understand, which is that politics is ultimately information warfare. And the ability to distribute your message on your terms equals political power. So people like the Mercers, the Kochs, the Ulines, these Republican donors haven't just given their money to candidates. They haven't just invested in political infrastructure, in organizing, in candidate training. They've invested in media and content creation. And until we in the Democratic Party narrow that gap, we are going to continue to dramatically underperform what should be our political standing in a country defined by a growing, progressive, diversifying majority. Is that we have given the keys of power to Republicans. And despite these victories against Fox and Tucker Carlson, I think we are at a potential crisis moment for Democratic politicians and messengers communicating. We have had 3 primary ways to get our message out for as long as I've been in politics. The first is through the traditional press. That is the primary way in which most Democratic politicians get their message out. They do an interview on CNN, they go and meet the press, they hold a press conference on Capitol Hill at the White House that is covered by the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, et cetera. Those entities might as well not exist for the vast majority of voters we need to win this election. It's consumed almost entirely by decided voters. To the folks who may encounter some of that content from these corporate media entities organically, they immediately distrust it because they don't trust the media, they don't trust corporations, and they're in generally don't trust institutions. Second has been through social, using Facebook, Twitter, primarily as ways to push our message out organically through social. Facebook, the political power of Facebook, particularly for our kind of content, has been diminishing as the platform has deprioritized political content. As everyone who's on Twitter knows here, that site is becoming a gigantic mess that could not even be here. I mean, even as we become smarter and better at TikTok, we don't even know if that's going to be around. Organic social is become a much less way to do it. And the way in which we've had the biggest advantage for the last couple cycles is in paid television advertising, mostly on linear TV, buying ads on 60 Minutes, football games, baseball games, the HG network. In an era of dramatic cord cutting that is happening at a heightening pace, the reach of those sorts of ads, where we've had an advantage because we've built a real grassroots fundraising machine that has given us advantage, is dropping precipitously. And so the three ways in which we get our message out are becoming less and less effective. And the speed at which that is happening faster than anyone, I think, has thought possible just 6 to 8 months ago. And so therefore, if we are going to have any chance to tell our story to our voters, and I define our voters to include our base, but also our target persuadable universe, on our terms, it's going to come with investing in progressive media infrastructure as a way to get our message in front of our voters. And I will say that this last point, that I'm going to introduce Tara, because I think that's what it says on the agenda here, is that I've been doing Democratic politics for more than 20 years now, which is a very painful thing for me to say publicly because it makes me feel very old. But every meeting I've ever had with a donor, every conference I've ever been to has always been about how the problems with the Democratic message. And 99% of those conversations about Democratic messaging have been about what we say, and 1% has been about how to get voters to hear what we're saying. And that is the shift in mentality that we need, is that we obviously have to have the best message we can get. We have to find a way to deliver it with authentic messages compellingly. But if we solve that problem and we don't focus on how we get the message in front of the people we need to hear it, we're not going to solve any of our political problems. And so that is why I am so glad to introduce Tara McGowan, who has been, ever since the day Donald Trump was elected, on the forefront of understanding that politics is information warfare, that we have to think outside of the box, we have to abandon the old models, we have to be incredibly creative and thoughtful about how we reach the voters we need, and we're only going to do it on our terms. And that began with her work with Acronym a few years ago, and then understanding that this 2020 election was so much closer than ever possibly should have been, that she then started Courier, which understood that the forefront of reaching the voters we need, who are largely low information voters who don't pay attention to politics every day, is going to happen at the local level. And so I've been incredibly privileged to work with Tara and talk to Tara all the time over the last 6-7 years now, however long it's been since Trump upended all of our lives. But she is at the forefront of this. She's one of the smartest people in the Democratic Party when it comes to how we go about getting our message out and how we win politics in the modern age. So I'm happy to turn it over to Tara.
Thank you so much, Dan. I really appreciate it. And hi, everybody. I just want to thank, this is an incredible group that's here. And I know that you all care very deeply about our country and our democracy. And that's why you're here and affiliated with all of these great groups that brought us together for this conversation. So I just want to thank you for all of the work you guys do. Every postcard, every call, every text, everything that you do, every dollar that you guys give to causes and candidates, it matters. And so I feel very lucky and honored to be speaking with all of you and here with Dan, who has been such a good friend and ally and advisor as we've started to build this infrastructure and really fight back against the right-wing media. So just a tiny bit of way of background on me. And then Jim, if I get the green light from you, I'm going to share my screen if I'm able to for a few slides to walk you guys through. But I started my career in journalism a very long time ago covering politics, and then I pivoted into politics when Obama won after 2008. And I ran some of the largest digital advertising programs on the left for organizations like Priorities USA, and ultimately started my own organization that ran a $100 million digital ad program to defeat Trump in the 2020 election. And as part of that work, something that I kept coming back to was this point that Dan made very eloquently, which is that I realized that the only way that we were really competing in the information war and today's media ecosystem in 2016 and even 2018 was relying on traditional media and paid advertising at scale, including the digital ad programs that I ran. And that we weren't building infrastructure, we weren't building relationships with Americans, and especially this growing population of Americans who do not watch cable news, to Dan's point about the small ratings of there. They do not pay through paywalls, which most local news and increasingly national news is hidden behind. Instead, they get their news and information for free by scrolling social media, scrolling Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, or in their email inboxes or their text message boxes or in their personal relationships. We call these folks passive news consumers. It is a massive population in this country. And yet when they are informed and when they vote, they tend to vote in line with our very popular values. I don't even like to use the word progressive because most of our values, most of the things that we care about are actually very popular across the majority of this country. But the right has labeled them as progressive or socialist or liberal, what have you. And so I decided to really step back from just advertising and really think about how could we build media infrastructure that met this population where they are online in a way that would actually build trusted relationships with them and deliver them factual, values-driven news and information that they could use to vote. So bear with me one second while I just share my screen so you guys have some visuals to look at. Can I get a thumbs up from someone that you guys can see the screen? Anyone? Yes? Am I getting a green light? Can you guys see my screen? Yes. Okay. Thank you. I got a thumbs up from the crowd. Thank you very much. So I started Courier Newsroom in 2019. Courier Newsroom is a network of pro-democracy newsrooms in battleground states across the country. We have teams of reporters and editors and social media content producers on the ground in 8 states. We're going to be expanding our map this year. And these are the states, obviously, they're battleground states, but that also means that is where we see the most disinformation flourish online. And because of the crippling of local news in America and everything else Dan spoke about the partisan media, the right-wing media infrastructure that's so powerful online and off, these are folks that live in local news deserts, and they live in good information deserts in a lot of ways. They live in echo chambers, and there isn't a lot of good, progressive, or even just factual reporting that is accessible to them about what's happening in Washington or their state house, or where extremism is playing out in their communities or their school boards. And so we built Courier to really fill this vacuum and obviously start in the states where this problem is the most severe, and the states that obviously have an outsized impact on the Electoral College and thus our national and federal elections. And so we are in Arizona, Florida, Iowa, Michigan, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Wisconsin. We have over 1.1 million subscribers that have signed up for our newsroom's email newsletters and follow their social accounts on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and other channels. And we reach millions and millions more Americans in these states just by publishing our content onto social media every single day. Let me change. So I mentioned who we focus on. I think this is a really important point because there is a lot of good journalism and good information in the world and on the internet. The issue is it is not reaching this population I spoke about. They aren't going to pay through paywalls. They aren't going to follow NPR or the New York Times. They really are getting just information passively. And so we've got to be very deliberate about meeting them where they are on the channels that they're on, and not assume, like old media used to, that if you build it and you have great reporting and content that people will come. That is no longer the case. You have to go to people. There's too much choice, and there's too much noise, and there's frankly too much disinformation floating online. And so you have to be intentional. And that's where I think Courier is ahead of the curve of a lot of traditional online newsrooms, is that we are very deliberate about the audience that we want to reach and build trust with. And this is that audience. And when it comes to elections, this audience is critical. They move the needle when they turn out and vote. And they only turn out when they feel informed and energized, and they feel like they can make a difference. So this is a big part of the work that our newsrooms do. So as I mentioned, we have to meet them where they are. And so our core distribution channels are email newsletters for slightly older audiences that do read email every day. Every newsroom has an email newsletter that goes out between 1 to 3 times a week and reaches our audience with local news, cultural news that they want for their communities, as well as our political reporting that is always factual. In addition, we are constantly producing reporting specific for how people consume it on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok. That's really important. We're not publishing an article on these platforms. Our reporters are making vertical videos, breaking down what's happening in the State House, how it matters to these audiences every single day. And that's how our audience is getting this information. So a really important piece is, because of who our audience is, they are not looking for political news. They are not like all of us on this call that are very, very proactively engaged and reading and consuming a ton of news. These are folks that are busy and often less college educated and lower income and diverse and younger. And so these folks, how do we build their trust? How do we build relationships with them? It's not going to be the political reporting we do. It's going to be providing them content and information they want. And right now, because of the state of local news in America, which is very, very grave, there is not a lot of local cultural reporting or local news on social media. And so it's also very tied to people's identity, where they live and the communities they're from. And they want to know the best hiking trails or playgrounds in their community, or events that they can take their families to, food, sports. This is the content and information they want. It's no different than New York Times strategy for subscribers. Give them games and food and travel, and then they'll read the news. So this is how we actually reach these audiences and build their trust. And this is why they follow our newsrooms and our reporters. And then, of course, we make sure that we are also giving them the information that they need to be well-informed voters and civic participants. And we do not endorse candidates. We do not stand for the Democratic Party. We do stand against extremism and authoritarianism. And we do stand for rights like the right to abortion for all, the right for equal opportunity, defending teachers and public schools in America, things that make our communities vital, our democracy, voting rights and access. And so we are very explicit and transparent about our positions, our values, and yet we will never compromise facts or truth. We will never sow division or hate. I have been criticized publicly for fighting fire with fire in partisan media. I like to respond and say that we fight fire with water. We are pushing good factual information and reporting from our values standpoint into the news feeds of folks that are not otherwise getting this information. We also make sure that we humanize it. A lot of political reporting in America is talking to an elite, highly educated, informed population. It's not connecting the dots for people about, they don't care how much a bill costs. They care if it's going to create a job in their community or fix a road or a bridge, or they care about if their school is going to ban books that their kids should read. They're not interested in the horse race or the national political thing. And in fact, most Americans, they don't trust either party. They increasingly don't trust institutions. So how do you build trust with them? How do you get them informed and get them participating? You have to center them in the story. And so that's something our reporters do. And they're able to do that because they live within the communities that they serve. And again, local is really how people identify with this information and this news. So the other thing that we do differently, and I think I'm over speaking, so I want to tie this up, but we care very much about actually measuring the impact. When I used to be a journalist a long time ago, before I went into politics, I really hated that I didn't know if any of the reporting I was doing was having an impact. You just hope that, people are reading it or sharing it, but or if it's a big investigative piece, maybe it gets some light shed on it in a committee hearing somewhere. But what we do at Courier is we really make sure that our boosted news, our email newsletters are actually increasing people's understanding, education, and frankly, turnout. We measure if we can increase turnout of our audience, if they are more likely to vote because they are getting good local news and information. And that differentiates us from other news organizations and makes us very strategic, which there's nothing wrong with. We actually want to be reporting on the issues that people care about. We want to make sure that they're informed. So those two charts you're looking at are from recent experiments that we ran with our newsrooms that showed that just getting news and information from our Michigan newsroom on the ballot initiative last year on abortion that would have recriminalized it in the state of Michigan, if that reporting increased their opposition to recriminalization of abortion, and it did. So getting this information actually does move the needle with folks in a very above board factual way. And I want to get Dan back into the conversation for this and then be able to open it up for questions, but we're in a really, really exciting moment. Obviously, we are in a very disruptive moment technologically, in the media, in the political sphere. We have been for some time. But if you haven't read Dan's book, you need to on Beating the Big Lie, because it goes through the whole history of the right-wing media and what we're up against and how we can really solve for this. But the really exciting update is that 6 years into this, since Trump shocked the world when he won, we have been actually building a better pro-democracy media ecosystem, and we're growing. But now we need to grow much faster. We know the stakes of the 2024 election. We know the stakes of state elections and local races in our communities where these extremists are running everywhere. And they're being very, very explicit about their agenda. And yet they still have the ability to really put Democrats in a corner, put progressives in a corner, and the mainstream media wants that fight. We have got to deliver this information and reporting directly to Americans. And so I'm so proud to be in the company of so many organizations that have either turned to be more pro-democracy or have been created for that explicit purpose, just like Courier has. So I've put a few of them on here. Obviously, Dan has been at the forefront of this even longer than I have. But I want to make everybody aware that while Courier is something that I just spoke explicitly about and believe in, and I'm happy to scale, we are in great company, and this is actually an ecosystem that's growing, but it needs folks like you all to support it, to tell your friends and your family and your neighbors who live in the states that we're in about it, so they follow it and share that content. And so they can also support it with their dollars. Building this infrastructure in these states is expensive, but it's only going to be sustained if we can really bring our progressive family in to help us build and grow this, and it will pay dividends for years and years and cycles to come. So Dan, I want to kind of kick it back to you to either add on that and then also maybe talk a little bit about how folks get involved and amplification efforts too that exist beyond just the media infrastructure we've started to build.
Sure. So I'd say a couple things here. Tara is exactly right that after years and years and years of people like myself and like Tara shouting into the wind, begging donors, begging Democratic political leaders to think about politics in terms of information warfare, we now have it's still small, but a growing funded network, or at least initially funded network of people doing really important work, including Courier, Crooked Media, which hosts Pod Save America, which I'm the host, has built a large podcast network and media company with newsletters and videos, whole other things that is out there being part of this pro-democracy network. And so the question for everyone here is, if we've convinced you that this is a problem and then we need a solution, what can you do to help? And so you have two things to offer. I was actually saying you have three things to offer. The first is your attention. If we are going to build this network, this pro-democracy network, we need the support of people who care about democracy to get involved. That means subscribing. It means subscribing on YouTube. It means subscribing for to podcasts, to download them, because that helps build the network, because there is a network effect to media in the internet age. And what that means is the more people that subscribe, the more people that like it, the more the algorithms will show it to more people. Republicans fundamentally understand this. Which is why they even all the way up to Trump, who I will never compliment in any forum other than this exact thing, is that he understands that if he draws this, his political strength comes from the right-wing network. So he tells people to buy right-wing books. He tells them to read stories that are good for them. His people try to get people to subscribe to YouTube channels that are right-wing YouTube channels, which means that the YouTube algorithm will show that content to more people. The same thing on Facebook pages. I mean, you compare the subscriber numbers to right-wing pages and pro-democracy progressive pages, it is embarrassing on our side. So patronize with your attention progressive pro-democracy media. Second, money. That includes subscribing to efforts that that have paywalls or subscription, but you can also donate. And this is one of the things we need help. We cannot wait around for a Democratic version of Robert Mercer or a Koch brother to come and do this. We all have the power to do it ourselves. Every little contribution to Courier or some of the other organizations up on the slide that Tara showed is incredibly helpful. And the third thing here is to understand that every time I'm sure everyone has had this conversation 1,000 times out of 2 years. If only people knew what Joe Biden had done about X, then they would feel Y. Or why won't the media cover Joe Biden's economic record? Or what the Democrats in Congress did? Or why the Republicans are so terrible? And every time you have that feeling, it's important to recognize that you have agency in that situation. You are carrying around, most of you are carrying on a phone. You are connected through your contacts, through social media platforms you're on, through just the people in your lives, your group chats with hundreds of other people. And you have the ability to share content, to pass that information along, to tell them about the work that Courier is doing, to tell them about the work Joe Biden's doing, and to push that message out. We have to think about every single person in the Democratic infrastructure, not just as a phone bank or an ATM, but as a messenger. And hopefully one day, and there's efforts underfoot for 2024 where the party and the presidential campaign will give you tools and technology to make that very easy, but you don't have to wait for that either. You have the ability to organize people in your lives using the technology and the relationships that you have.
Thank you, Dan. Jim and Julie, do you guys want to open it up to questions or kick us off with them?
Yes, that's exactly the right time. This is Julie Greenberg, and we have so many questions here that I think we're going to cover a lot of ground. The first, we had 3 questions from 3 different people, Deborah Garvey, Abby Lichtenstein, and George Hastings, about the states where you have the newsrooms and the states that you don't. So why are Nevada and Rhode Island grayed out? What about Texas? Why Florida and Iowa, but not Nevada and Georgia? So I don't know that you have to go into your whole placement strategy, but I know you do have some expansion coming up. So maybe you could just say a few words about where you are and where you aren't and where you're going.
Yeah, absolutely. And shout out to whoever mentioned Rhode Island. That's my home state. I would love to have a Courier newsroom in Rhode Island. I'll just be really frank. What it comes down to is resources, and where some of our bigger underwriting supporters and investors, when I got Courier off the ground, wanted to prioritize, and also, as I mentioned earlier on, where we believe states were that have an outsized impact. We built a very scalable model at Courier that can truly go anywhere. We would like to get more hyper-local into the states we're already in, because hyper-local politics, hyper-local issues are really where people are. We also know, obviously, so many of our rights are going to be decided increasingly at the state level. And so breaking that down is something we want to do, but we also have built a model that we can bring to other states and other communities very quickly if we have the resources to do that, the financial resources to do that. So we are going to be expanding. We are going to be having newsrooms. We have not talked about this publicly, so I guess this is a little bit of the soft rollout, but we are going to be opening newsrooms in both Nevada and New Hampshire this year, which we also know are critical states. when we look at both the primaries and the general elections and just the overall makeup of the electorate. But we truly do want to go everywhere, and it comes down to being able to raise the resources. We don't go into a new state any longer unless we have 2 years of committed overhead funding for a newsroom, and that can range from $250,000 to $600,000 a year based on the size of the state or the newsroom, the population that we want to reach. So I'm very, very happy to always talk to anyone offline. If there is an organized group of people that want to bring our model into a state, that is how we organize and how we are able to raise the funds to do it.
A couple of people asked specifically about radio, which is not what you do specifically, but people know that it's a very potent right-wing medium. And so what can you say about radio?
Sure. I think radio is really important. Jim, you're right. We have decided to focus first and foremost on social media and the internet and email, because that is increasingly where people are. But we also know that there are still big populations of voters that listen to radio every day. I mean, basically a lot truckers and people that work in lower income jobs have radio on all day. Other people in offices do as well. And so we know that radio is a really important piece of the puzzle, as is still local television for a lot of communities, which most of the local television stations in this country have been bought up by Sinclair, a pro-MAGA corporation that spreads intentional extremist disinformation and views via local TV, trusted local TV networks. So terrestrial traditional media is really important. It's not what we do, but we do have good partnerships. In Wisconsin, for instance, our newsroom there, Up North News, they have a 3-hour daily radio show across 15 stations in Wisconsin that are owned by a company I had on the screen before, Civic Media, which is a pro-democracy company that has started to buy up radio stations. They're also Latino Media Network that I had on screen as well. They just purchased $60 million worth of Spanish language radio stations across the country, in part to take it out of the hands of some extremists that had talk radio shows. So that's a strategy too. Even if you don't turn the content strategy around, being able to get it out of the wrong people's hands is actually really important today, as we know media ownership changes media quite a bit, pointing to Twitter and other folks. You want to, ownership is a more increasingly important thing. So we're very supportive of that. We think buying radio, getting more pro-democracy content and voices across traditional channels is equally important. It's just not what we specifically do, but we love to partner to get more of our reporters and our reporting onto those channels.
So this is a question for Dan from Leon Rubis. What can be done about the fact that lots of people, GOP voters, vote based on emotions, not facts, reality, and evidence, and thus are very susceptible to fear-mongering and disinformation of right-wing media? It's an inherent messaging disadvantage for fact-based progressives. And I'm going to add, isn't it? So is it something we can't overcome?
Well, Democrats have a much more complicated political challenge than the Republicans, in the sense that we have a much more diverse ideologically, demographically, geographic coalition than the Republicans. And so we have to appeal to people who are in our base, people who distrust people of both parties, people who are lean Democrat, but are very skeptical of politics. So we have to do all of those things. Republicans can win because of the structural advantage they have in the Senate Electoral College by simply appealing to their base if our larger coalition does not turn out. So we have a higher ceiling, they have a higher floor, I guess would be the way to think about it. And the challenge here, I think, is less that there's a bunch of Republican voters who are never going to vote for us, and we're probably going to vote anyway, who are motivated by fear. There has always been a radical right-wing element in American politics. It is never had as much power as it's had now, because it's now fueled by a right-wing media and has a representative. I can put it this way: it's that there's always been this right-wing element of Republican Party. You can go back to the John Birchers as an example, but they were sort of in tension with the Republican leadership. They now are the Republican leadership, so that that element of American politics is stronger. We don't have to win any of those people. To win elections, Democrats don't have to convince a single person to take off a MAGA hat and put on some sort of dark Brandon merch. Like, that's not a thing we have to do. What we are competing against is some of those same emotional triggers that power media in this environment. Anger, outrage, conflict are the fuel for virality and internet traffic, which means it's the fuel for traditional media economics. And so, which is why we can't win on the old system. We have to build a new system where there is greater alignment between the incentives of the content providers and the things that we care about, and frankly, America cares about, that reach the vast majority of people, because we are narrow casting in our politics, right? 60%, more than half of Americans don't participate in our politics. Huge percent, 70%, if not more, don't participate in political media, period. All the conversations we have about Twitter and Fox and Tucker Carlson and Rachel Maddow, that might as well be in a foreign language to them. And so if we're going to reach them, we don't have to emulate what they do. We just have to create a way to get our message out on our terms. And so it's frustrating to say, like, there is a group of people that we're never going to reach, but that has always been true. That is not a new fact in American politics. It's just that the worst of that element just now has a higher prominence in Republican politics than it has in recent memory.
Okay, so for Tara, thank you. This is a question I have actually also. It's kind of provocative in a way, from Matthew. He phrases it, does your audience care that you are explicit about helping Democrats? I mean, sometimes it's not too subtle in your vegetable garden there. What are your thoughts on that?
I have so many thoughts on this. I would say, so we actually know the balance of our coverage is much more about accountability and shedding light on extremism in state houses and nationally. Of course, though, I think a big flaw in our media and traditional journalism in America is that reporters, and I can speak with authority because I went to journalism school and was a reporter, they're not incentivized to talk about the good that government does when government does good. That is, they're not incentivized to do that. It is always about shedding light on corruption, and frankly, increasingly in a defensive posture to be able to hold up both sides, Republican and Democrat, in any story or reporting, even if one side is blatantly lying and the other side is using facts and science to support their arguments. And that's really destructive. And so it's also not where people are today. Objectivity is not what most people are looking for in journalism or media. They're looking for transparency. And frankly, increasingly, whether folks like it or not, but it's the state of media and the world we live in and how we consume information, they are looking for like-minded information in certain ways. And because of our audience would not mostly self-define as Democrats, it's not advantageous to always talk about Democrats anyhow, even if that were the goal. It's actually about making sure they have the information they need, the factual information they need about where candidates running to represent them in their states, in their communities, and in Washington stand on issues that they care about, on their right to abortion access, on their right to vote, on investment in strengthening public schools, what have you. And so we are transparent. So people have the choice if they want to subscribe or follow or not. We're not trying to deceive anyone whatsoever. That is not our model. We transparently post our values on all of the websites. And so I think that is up for folks. I think the first part of your question though, Jim, I have a sort of sad answer there, depressing answer, I should say, is that increasingly there isn't very much media criticism. The people that are going to try to go find our values on the site or determine that we are progressive or left-leaning and not want to be a part of it, it's a very small percentage of the audience. And frankly, they are more higher information. They're not the folks we're trying to reach as much. So as long as we are transparent about our values and our positions, and we never endorse candidates as a rule, we just don't. We just provide the information about where candidates stand when it comes election time, but year round are breaking down the issues and who is on what side of these debates and these fights that have real world implications on our audience's lives.
So here's a question that I share the concern, and I think almost everybody on this Zoom would. So Dan, this is for you, from Lakshmi Mundunuri. She's asking about how to get out of the blue bubble. So I live in a blue bubble and all of my friends think like me. Who do I reach out to? So you talked a little bit about a strategy we could use where we subscribe so that all of the material that is served up that may not be served up otherwise to people we don't know does get to them. What other things can we do as people in blue bubbles who know other people in blue bubbles to make sure that when we do get louder, the right people hear it, the same people that Courier might be reaching out to, but we're going to try in our own way to reach out to them too.
So I'd say a couple things about that. One is reaching out to people who we're ideologically aligned with is also good, because each person is a force multiplier, right? If you are spreading information to every person that you reach out to is going to talk to other people. They're going to be engaged in political conversations, particularly over the next year. So you are arming each of those people with information. There's an exponential value to it. Second, I think we sometimes think about persuasion in this narrow sense of how do we go find a Republican and convince that Republican to be a Democrat. In this day and age, that is a very, very, very challenging thing to do. And we need to think about who are the people who are in our lives, who may agree with us on a lot of issues, but probably aren't going to vote. So you probably have a lot of people like that in your quote unquote blue bubbles. People, could be your friends, could be your friends' friends, could be your friends' kids, could be your kids' friends, whatever that group is. And so persuasion has become this term that in political discourse means convincing a Republican to be a Democrat or vice versa. What it really is persuading someone to vote. And so that's point one. Point two is there is even value. It would be great if we all had a Facebook network or a group chat with a whole bunch of voters in Waukesha County, Wisconsin. But even if we don't, right? And you may have, for people you went to college with, people you used to work with via your Facebook network, who are spread out pretty far around the country and may not just be in your current blue bubble. I have a lot of, I've worked in Democratic politics my whole life. Most of my friends are Democrats, but I got a lot of people who I went to high school with or went to college with, who I am connected to online, who are not in my blue bubble per se. Even if I didn't have that, just pushing, if you're doing it through Facebook or Instagram or even Twitter in its current state or TikTok or whatever your social media platform of choice is, simply pushing content into the ecosystem has value because it is teaching the algorithm what gets traction, what gets engagement. So it will show that engagement to more people. And the thing that I think not enough people understand about how these social media platforms work, and I will just use Facebook as an example because it's the most widely used one, is Facebook only shows your network a fraction of the things you post. It makes an assessment based on what it thinks the people in your network will engage with to determine whether they show it to them. Because what they want to do is they want to make money from having that person stare at that piece of content for as long as possible and stay on the site as long as possible. So the more stuff you put in there that is of progressive content, the more the algorithm will show that stuff. And so there's value in getting out there, even if you're not reaching the one undecided voter in Fulton County or Maricopa County or Waukesha County or wherever else that's going to decide the election. Just getting our messaging out there is a way to build our megaphone and to push back against the absolute onslaught of messaging and disinformation framed in right-wing terms.
Okay, I have a kind of a follow-up question, and some of you've already covered, but I think it's worthwhile. Tom asks, how can we create and support a grassroots information warrior network? People need a source of reliable, shareable content. And I will add that people need to learn techniques about how the best way is for them to sort of reach out to their networks. What kind of, call it argumentation for want of a better word. Any thoughts along those lines?
Sure. I mean, there are groups who are doing this. It's something that is at least a part of what Vote Save America, which is an adjunct of Crooked Media, does. The folks at Demcast host trainings on this. Other grassroots groups have done it related to the specific issues that they work on. My best understanding is that this is going to be a big part of the Democratic efforts from the Biden campaign in 2024, that they fundamentally understand this challenge in the way to better leverage our tremendous grassroots network of volunteers to serve as messengers. And so there's going to be more to come on that. So there are a bunch of different things happening out there. I would say stay tuned probably for the best of it to come. But in the interim, Demcast is a group that I've worked with a lot, who's been very thoughtful about this and engaged a lot of people, particularly in the run up to the midterms.
And Nick of Demcast is actually here. I've seen him pop up in the chat a few times. So Nick, you should definitely put your link in the chat if you haven't already, so folks can sign up for Demcast. It's a great organization that does this. You can also sign up at Courier's website. And if you sign up at couriernewsroom.com, you can keep up to date, because we are going to be very connected to a lot of these efforts Dan mentioned as well, to make sure that our local news is getting into the funnel of these networks as they start to grow, so people can really amplify and share and spread this good content from a number of organizations beyond just Courier, especially in the lead up to elections.
So maybe we'll take a couple more questions and then we'll shift to our call to action.
Right, and I was just going to say that one of the things that Jim will show in just a couple minutes in the call to action is the links that are probably in the chat, but you don't need to copy from the chat, because we're going to provide a link to demcast.com and to the Courier newsletters in the follow-up email. So people can relax and just wait for that to come, because we knew that was going to be important to come up. So here's a question from Susan Lyon that's really down to the brass tacks. How do people see Courier? She says, I know when I open my computer, news from Google or Yahoo or Bing automatically comes up and pushes stories. Does Courier do that? Can we do something like that to elevate Courier stories? Where do people see them?
Sure.
And how, the mechanics of this.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So we do, some of our newsrooms do filter their local news and articles into some of the larger aggregate sources like Google and Apple News. But for the most part, it really is about going to the websites and signing up for the newsletters, or following the newsrooms on the social channels where most of our reporting lives. So we will definitely make sure that Jim and Julie share the links so folks can sign up for specific state newsrooms. But we focus much more on how do we create newsletters and social media experiences with our reporting for those audiences that aren't like all of us, who go and read a lot of news proactively every day. So a lot of it does live on social media, but email newsletters are probably the best product for an audience that wants to stay in the loop, that maybe doesn't go on TikTok or Instagram every day. So we will make sure that you guys have those links. And we reach these audiences where they are on these channels, and use advertising and other means to get our news coverage and our reporters in front of them, so then they subscribe and they follow.
Okay, I'm going to pick out a Biden question.
Let's let it be for Dan too, because I know Dan has another, he has a hard stop, so he's got to go jump probably 2 minutes early. So if there's questions specific for Dan too.
Well, if this could be him, sure. How would you rate the content of his announcement in terms of the ideas you're talking about today? And it relates to the question about, I'll call it amplification. So if there are key messages in what's, for example, in something that the White House is putting out, is there a way to sort of amplify that kind of content?
Absolutely. I mean, you can very easily, if you just take the Biden announcement video, for instance, I am positive the people who made that video and the president himself would be very grateful for every single person who posted it on their Facebook page, who tweeted about it, who put it on TikTok, who, and probably even most valuably, send it to a bunch of your friends in a group chat. You have a family group chat, a bunch of friends, people you can text it to, because and I write about this in my book, but all the studies show that the trust people put in a piece of content is based on the person who shared it with them, not who made the content or where the content came from. So it's not about whether it's from the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or Joe Biden. It's whether they trust you when you shared it with them. So if there are people in your lives, share it with them. And you can do that all the time. If you see an interesting article you can share with them. If you see all the good work that Tara's staff is doing, share that with people. If you stumble on something that is about a battleground state from one of the Courier newsrooms, and you have people, people live in that state, send it to them. It's one of the challenges with this whole problem of dealing with this right-wing propaganda network is it feels like an insurmountable problem. If we don't solve the whole thing today, we're screwed. Remember just how narrow these elections are. The last two elections in total, the 2016 and 2020 election, were decided by a total number of voters not much larger than the group of people who sit in the University of Michigan football stadium every Saturday in the fall. That's the last two presidencies. And so every single person that you put a piece of content in front of, who then shares it to someone, that is like within a tractable part of the difference we have to make. And so just get out there and start doing it. There's no grand strategy to it. There's not just, if you see something that you think is valuable to people they would not see otherwise, send it to them. If you got a big platform, great. If you have a small platform, great. If you got one friend in Georgia, send it to that person.
Okay, we're at that point. I guess I'd like to suggest that people give some applause to Dan and Tara.
Please clap, as Jeb Bush would say.
Then we're going to move to next steps. So,
Well, I'm going to drop. I just want to thank everyone for what they're doing. Please support Tara and all the amazing work at Courier. It is a essential part of what's going to happen in this election and for the building of long-term sustained political power in this country.
okay, I'm going to share my screen for this kind of wrap up. All right. So this was not a fundraiser, right? But yet there is something to be said for both funding and also I'll call it do-it-yourself, DIY kind of approach, which is a little bit what the Demcast approach is. And I want to say that we are going to provide you with a lot of detail in the follow-up on things that you can do, but to give you a taste of it. And perhaps the most important thing is just to recognize that I know that you are smart and committed people. And the reason for doing this was just to get out on the table some of the fundamentals of this and how important it is, and the idea that there are things that we can do. And not everybody's going to fall into line and do one single thing or whatever, but we're counting on you to do specific things. One of the things that we're putting together, I'm not sure if you can see the whole line, but 31st Street is going to be putting together some workshops. And again, trying to bring things that we think will be particularly appealable for grassroots groups to fund, and kind of have a marriage in a way of people talking to project folks and funders to see if there's some kind of a marriage. So that's one thing to try to make happen. Then, of course, you can subscribe to one or more Courier newsletters. I will tell you, I subscribe to 4, and it's just kind of fun. And in addition to the ones that they also have one that's like geared to us, and we will tell you, in other words, the ones that are geared to the low information voters, and they're very interesting, but there's also ones that are geared to, let's say, more high information voters. Donate to Courier and other up and coming media organizations that we heard discussed. And we do think that Demcast is the best in breed for this DIY kind of approach. And really want to encourage people to do that. You'll get a link on how to do that. We think in general to try to look for what I call enlightened local news networks, outlets, I should say. Try to support them, try to keep them in business, however you can do it. And then just look for any other opportunities. Again, you're smart people. I just hope you'll be scrambling around because this is so important. I mean, if we don't deal with this problem, and we won't solve it all at once, but if we don't deal with this problem, we're going to continue to have these elections that are like nail biters. And then just to make the point that, again, we're going to send an email with a lot of details and a video. One of the things that will be included is that we actually have a very good kind of compendium and schematic of a lot of things that are operating in this ecosystem. And it'll give you the opportunity to, to look at some of these things that I think might be really great. So with that, I guess I'm going to, again, some applause for Tara. And I guess we're done. Have a nice day.
Thank you, Jim and Julie, for bringing this group together. And thank you so much, everybody, for taking the time. What a wonderful group.